I'm taking a ceramics class this semester. I don't know if you know this, but the world has gone to hell in a handbasket. We no longer are, like, going to college. I have no idea how my ceramics class is going to continue, but I personally would like to do some ceramics. I don't have a kiln, the tools that I would use, a wheel, I don't have anything really, but what I do have is plasticine. If you know nothing about ceramics, plasticine is just a clay that doesn't dry out. It's good for making molds with and stuff like that, but that's all the boring stuff. What am I gonna make? I'm gonna make me a hat. I want a hat, I'm gonna make me a hat. I'm not gonna use clay to make the hat, I'm gonna use resin. I've never done anything like this before. What the hell? Might as well, right? That rhymed. I can do it if I want to, cause quarantine and classes and college and so might as well. I forgot to say that I'm making Padme's hat from Star Wars. Okay, bye.
The following portion of this video is incorrect. As I said, I don't know what I'm doing, so I'll show you what not to do as well as what to do. Here's the timestamp if you want to skip to the part that's not wrong.
Step 1. I'm going to gracefully wrap my head in cling film. Make sure you do it gracefully. If it's not graceful, it doesn't count. And then I'll use some duct tape. There we go. Ow, ow, ow. Ow! This is the next step. I'm gonna take this and I'm gonna stuff it with towels, and these towels will become my head.
I accidentally deleted the footage of me making the towel head, but it was wrong anyway, so it doesn't matter.
After I made the towel head, I decided to try to cover the towel head in a layer of plasticine clay. As time went on, it became more and more clear that the layer that I created did not fit my head at all in the slightest. However, I didn't want to give up on this, so I decided to add some embellishment. The next thing I tried and failed to do was make what I will call a fin on top of my head. I kept trying to get the dimensions of my head correct, but for some reason I just couldn't do it. Seriously, no matter what I did, I really could not get this. I have no idea why. Finally, instead of continuing to work from a towel head that was not the correct dimensions of my own head, I decided to pony up and do what I should have done all along and make an actual mold of my head. You're supposed to use plaster strips when you make a mold of your head, but I do not have plaster strips. I only have plaster and cheesecloth. So I cut up pieces of cheesecloth so that I could dunk them in plaster and then put them all over my new shiny bald head.
Okay, I have it on my head. I don't need this from you.
After the plaster had dried fully, I was ready to take it off of my head. Unfortunately, the plaster was not ready to come off of my head.
It's not coming off.
I decided that I would try to wiggle the skin of my face and my head around to try and get the plaster off of my head.
I bet I can get it off. It'll come off.
It didn't work as well as I hoped.
Ooh, I can feel it moving. I put on a bunch of Vaseline.
I am slowly but surely losing all hope.
You know what I'm realizing is that I think that this might not have been the right way to do things. But gosh darn it, I will get this off of my head. Oh, it's budging. It's moving. Ow. Okay. Ow. If I could just get it up, off. I'm so screwed. Oh no. I can get it off. I just have to pull hard enough. God, it hurts. Ow, 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 ow. Oh, it's so close. It's so close. It's so... Oh, thank God. My head hurts so bad. Oh, wow. Success.
While waiting for my plaster hat to dry, I decided to try and make the sail again. I picked an arbitrary length and made a portion of a circle. To do this, take a ruler and a Sharpie and make a circle. Now that the plaster cast of my head was done, I decided to make my head out of foam. The foam that I used was Flex Foam from Smooth On. In order to make the foam, I mixed equal parts of A and B together in these 2 color-coded cups. Wow, look how that rose! The next thing I had to do was get the foam head out of the plaster casting. This proved to be quite a challenge, as it just did not want to come out. The foam stuck in several places to the plaster. I used all sorts of tools, but just nothing would work. Eventually, the only way that I could get the foam out was to break the plaster. Once that was done, I was on to the next step. I took the foil that I used to make my potatoes the night before and turned it into a nice foil version of the hat that I wanted. This is going to be the base layer. Try and make sure that you make it as flat as you possibly can. I then covered all visible foil in a nice thin layer of plasticine clay. I then prematurely started to decorate my new creation. This was clearly a mistake, as I had not yet finalized the shape of it. After hours of work decorating it, I finally accepted that the shape was just not right, and I had to cut off all of the decoration that I had been working on. Now that the shape was finalized, I could finally start actually decorating the hat. I cut out 2 different size pentagons, about the same shape as the diamond in that one level of Zoom beanies. I used these as templates to cut out clay in the same shape. Once that was done, I pressed it onto the hat. Then I created a nice thin lining around each and every diamond and blended it all in. Then I created little spikes in the center of each of the pentagons. I did this to remind my adversaries that I have little spikes on my hat, and I could stab them if I want to. I then quickly created little loopies because the spiky pentagons were getting quite lonely. I also blended those loopies in. I created some triangular templates, and I added small triangles all over the hat. I then added some extra snazzy lines around it to make it look even cooler. After that, I used a variety of tools to create some texture. Once I had created the texture, I tried to fill the hat in. I quickly realized that I didn't like this and that it would probably collapse the hat, so I decided that I would try to create the mold of the hat without closing off the inside. This was a terrible, terrible mistake, and it cost me hours of my life.
Okay, this is the setup. I have 4 pieces of cardboard. I glued them together with the same clay that I made the stuff out of. I'm not sure how well it's gonna hold, but plaster doesn't run super far, I think. I'm gonna spray it down with some Pam cooking spray, just so I can demold it a little bit easier. What the hell, let's give it a shot. Several days worth of work might be about to go down the drain if this doesn't go well, so. I was very wrong. Apparently, plaster does indeed run. It broke through my cardboard almost immediately. This is not proper mold making etiquette. There's like a giant lump in the middle. It'll be fine.
I did not film the demolding process because it was an utter disaster. I couldn't get the clay out of the mold, so I had to Dremel away the excess plaster. It took a very long time, but fortunately, I was able to salvage the mold, and the next step is mixing the epoxy. We finally have the mold done. I'm not imagining that this is gonna go super well, but screw it, alright? Let's just do it, man. Like, honestly, we're here, so let's just freaking do it. I ended up getting this amazing casting resin. The reason that I wanted a 10-minute window was because of the shape of the mold. It's just gonna fall and pool in there. So I'm literally gonna be like holding it and like moving it around so that it doesn't just all pool down there. I mixed up equal parts A and B of the casting resin. Then I tilted, shoveled, and coaxed the resin into the proper placement before it solidified. Once the resin was solid, I removed it from its mold. Fortunately for me, in this stage, the resin was quite bendy, so I was able to remove it from the mold quite easily. And by easily, I do mean that it took all of the muscles in my arms to do it. This is what it looked like once it came out of the mold. Doesn't it just look smashing? I made 2 castings from the mold. For the one that's going to go on the back of my head, I cut off the part that would have gone on my forehead because There is no forehead on the back of my head. I then epoxied the front and back pieces together. After that, I decided that I didn't want to go through the trouble of making a plaster mold for the side panels. So I decided to make a quick mold out of clay. Then I poured the epoxy, allowed the epoxy to dry, cut the epoxy down to shape, and used more epoxy to stick that epoxy onto the other epoxy. I sanded down the epoxy-covered seams, and now my hat is ready to paint. I'm using this gold paint, a black paint I never show, and paintbrushes. To start off the painting process, I decided to paint the whole side the color of my soul, with black acrylic paint. I did this because it helped to cancel out the oranginess in the gold that I used. Then, I painted the entire side gold. God, that's so satisfying. I added another layer of gold paint, then I started to work on the detailing. As you can see by the back of my head. I added little black lines to let people know that I was spunky. Then I went through and painstakingly added shadows to each and every single one of the divots in the little crescent shapes, semicircles, whatever. I then went through and defined the edge of each and every one of the semicircles to add more depth. Then I painted in the details on and defined the edges of all of the trapezoids. I then painted in the details on the weird scaly pattern on the edge, and defined its edges as well. Now the paint job is finally complete. I covered the whole hat in 2 layers of an epoxy called glaze coat because it was all I had. It's a bit too shiny for my taste, but what are you gonna do? Now it's time for the grand reveal. Prepare yourself, prepare yourself. You are now seeing the grand reveal.